There's a lot of fear-mongering these days about immigration, but as the saying goes, it's not actually the immigrants who are coming for your jobs, it's the robots. Robots equipped with increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence, it's a thing, are rapidly becoming competent in a widening array of fields. And the meditation that Danielle shared earlier invited us to imagine these robots of the near future as aliens. But unlike in the movies, these robot aliens haven't come to conquer us, at least not immediately. They haven't come to extract our resources. They don't want to meet our leader. The aliens, it turns out, just want to work. And they're really good at it. Each of these alien robots are highly intelligent, capable of learning language, solving problems, even exhibiting creativity. And once they master any given skill, they're willing to do it tirelessly, with little repairs or time off. They don't need vacation or the weekends, and they can be replicated for increasingly cheap rates. Although this thought experiment about robot-like aliens is from Martin Ford's important book, The Rise of Robots, Technology and the Threat of a Jobless Future. It was published in 2015. And if robots do eventually take over most or essentially all of the jobs currently done by we human beings, then what are we humans going to do? One option is some sort of government-sponsored jobs program in which the jobs that robots could do much more cheaply and efficiently are instead reserved for humans, protected for us. This possibility was famously skewered in the 1950s by the late Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who has been called, and this may or may not be, this may be a dubious honor, the second most popular economist of the 20th century, right? If you're curious, number one was John Maynard Keynes. And while consulting with the government of a developing Asian nation, Friedman was taken to a large-scale public works project where he was surprised to see a large number of workers wielding shovels. But he saw very few bulldozers and tractors and other heavy earth-moving equipment, even though he knew this was happening in other parts of that same country. They did have bulldozers, etc. So Friedman asked, quite incredulously, so why not give the workers spoons instead of shovels? Like, what are you proving if you're just letting them do shovels when a bulldozer could come in and do all that work that they did so much faster? After all, shovels are also a technology to make work less labor-intensive for humans. The only reason not to use a bulldozer is, I guess, some belief that workers must do some sort of labor to justify paying them. This is sort of Puritan work ethic, right? You have to justify your existence. And if that's the case, why not just give them spoons, as Friedman suggests, or just let them use their hands for that matter? Why not tell them to do the hokey pokey and turn themselves around for 8 hours and then clock out? If it's the case that a robot can, again, come in behind them and do the job much faster. The economy is more complicated than that, of course, as we heard at the end of the spoken meditation. It's important to keep in mind that a worker is also a consumer, at least in capitalism. When a worker is replaced by a machine, that machine does not go out and consume. It doesn't go buy things to fuel GDP. So if machines take all our jobs, who's going to have enough spare wages or wealth to buy stuff to power the economy? Or are we just going to be left with a small elite who have all the wealth and that they power the economy by themselves? And what are the rest of us going to, just out there in the cold? As the saying goes, though, one response could be to restructure the economy, in the spirit of never let a crisis go to waste. A crisis can be an opportunity to do things differently, so the threat of a jobless future can be an invitation to restructure our economy. And history tells us that similar crises have happened in the past. The mechanization of agriculture vaporized millions of jobs. It used to be that basically everyone farmed, right? All of a sudden we had the agricultural revolution. Drove crowds of unemployed farmhands into cities in search of factory work. But later automation and globalization pushed workers out of the manufacturing sector and into service jobs. That's where we are now. What's more, these new jobs were often better. That's a subjective word, but they often had upgraded skills, better wages, things like that. But we need to have a serious reckoning about how hard should we fight, actually, to protect the jobs that robots might take away. Would more leisure time be so terrible? To quote another economist, this time the late John Kenneth Galbraith, leisure, it turns out, is quite a peculiar thing. Leisure is often seen as very good for the rich, quite good for Harvard professors, but very bad for the poor. As to how much any given one of us should be concerned about the rise of the robots, there was an article in the New York Times earlier this month that summed up most people's view of the current situation. Most Americans see artificial intelligence as a threat to jobs, parentheses, just not theirs. So almost all of us continue to regularly use early-stage artificial intelligence devices, so navigating apps, streaming services, the data you're giving, Netflix and Amazon, every time you make a choice about what to watch, smartphone personal assistants, other smart home devices. We're using all of this early AI that's collecting all of this data about human behavior that's making each next generation of AI in turn possible. And the possibilities just keep growing, or should I say, metastasizing. Indeed, Kevin Kelly, the founding executive editor of Wired magazine, has outlined the 7 stages of denial related to a robot taking your job. A little time passes between each stage, during which the robot's AI rapidly improves its performance capability. Stage 1 is, a robot or computer cannot possibly do the tasks that I do. And a little time passes, and we enter stage 2. Okay, it can do a lot of those tasks, but it can't do everything I do. And a little time passes. Okay, it can do everything I do. Except it needs me when it breaks down, which is often. And a little time passes. Okay, now it's operating flawlessly on the routine stuff, but I need to train it for new tasks. And a little time passes. Okay, it can just have my old boring job, because it's obvious that was not a job humans were really meant to do. And a little time passes. Wow, now that robots are doing my old job, my new job is much more interesting and it pays more. And a little time passes. I'm so glad that a robot computer cannot possibly do my job. And a little time passes, and we're back to stage 1. And it repeats. One of the biggest misconceptions is that robots are only coming for so-called blue-collar jobs, but it's not only so-called routine and repetitive jobs that are in the crosshairs of AI-empowered robots. Increasingly sophisticated algorithms mean that the key word for determining whether your job is under threat is to what extent is it at all predictable. Could another person learn to do your job by studying a detailed record of everything you've ever done in the past? Or could someone become proficient repeating the tasks that you've already completed in a way that students take practice tests for exams? To put myself in the spotlight, what ministerial algorithms might be created by constantly surveilling 24/7 what every religious professional in the world is doing? I suspect that even the ministers too may someday find ourselves experiencing those 7 stages of denial. If robots can tirelessly do pastoral care and can learn to be a lot more responsive than like Siri is right now, or Alexa, and you can see all these tasks being, take every sermon that's ever been preached and then learn how that process works. It's amazing what big data can do. To give a more high-end example of what I'm talking about, radiologists, physicians who specialize in the interpretation of medical images, are among the highest paid doctors today, with an average salary of $340,000 a year. Today, to become a radiologist requires approximately 13 years of training beyond high school, but each year computers are getting better at analyzing images. I can already see the appeal if I needed a radiologist to work, and can already see the appeal of saying, let's get a second opinion from a robot, right? Might catch something you've missed. But what about a robot empowered with every interpretation every radiologist has ever made? How good might that computer be? And then you just replicate it and it's everywhere. The day is likely coming soon when we will have only robot radiologists. The day's also likely coming soon when you enter a fast food restaurant that is almost 100% automated. And that's really important to take in mind. All those service sector jobs that people are doing, they may completely evaporate. You will enter your order through an interface. Your food will be prepared precisely to specifications by a robot. A few years ago, for instance, a company called Momentum Machines designed a machine capable of producing 365 machines per hour. So this is back in like 2012, 2013. It toasts the bun, it slices the fresh ingredients like tomatoes, onions, pickles after the order is placed. So it's made fresh. It's not like it takes the ground beef, The company estimates the machine will pay for itself in less than a year because you don't have to pay human labor. You just pay for the robot once. There may well not even be a human manager physically present. Rather, there may be a centralized facility remotely monitoring the individual restaurants. This is already happening. There's a whole chain of sushi restaurants in Japan that already use this model with no humans present and the manager off-site. Heck, it may even be that you skip going to the restaurant altogether. You just pull up there's an app for that, and then a drone will bring you your burger or whatever, right? To give you a few more examples, StatsMonkey is a program being developed to automate sports reporting by transforming objective data about every particular game into a compelling narrative. More shocking are the advances machines are making in composing music that is emotionally moving to human beings based on inputting all the data from the history of music and humans' response to it. Dishearteningly to we mere mortals, these complex pieces of music that do emotionally move human beings take mere minutes for the computer to compose. Similar software is already developing, AI is already making art as well. Using a database of paintings that have been labeled with adjectives by humans as dark or sad or inspiring. The software itself can then take whatever art it's developed and just increasingly discern whether or not its objectives are being achieved in its painting. So it can both take the history of art, paint something, and then discern based on humans' responses to previous paintings what emotions will be evoked by the average human. Is this progress? Are we programming our own obsolescence? Importantly, these questions are not new. You'll recall our opening example from the 1960s of Milton Friedman asking, if we're going to hold ourselves back from using bulldozers, why not give workers spoons instead of shovels? Well, a decade earlier, Kurt Vonnegut's first novel, Piano Player, published in 1952, described an automated economy in which industrial machines managed by a tiny technical elite did virtually all the work, while the vast majority of the populace faced a meaningless existence and a hopeless future. Vonnegut's science fiction seems increasingly less fiction and more science. Consider, when you think about, could it be that a tiny elite has all the wealth and all the power and the rest of us have nothing to do and are outside the castle gates, that we become the barbarian hordes, right? Consider that YouTube was founded in 2015 by 3 people. 2 years later, the company was purchased by Google for $1.65 billion. At the time of its acquisition, YouTube employed a mere 65 people, the majority of them highly skilled engineers. That works out to a valuation of $25 million per employee. Are you worth that much? I'm not, So, in April 2012, Facebook acquired the photo-sharing startup Instagram for $1 billion. The company employed 13 people. That's $77 million per employee. Fast forward another 2 years to February 2014, and Facebook purchased the mobile messaging company WhatsApp for $19 billion. WhatsApp had a workforce of 55, giving it a valuation of $345 million per employee. Contrast that with the automotive industry, for example. At peak employment in 1979, General Motors alone had 840,000 workers, so close to 1 million workers, but earned about $11 million in 1979. That's 20% less than Google raked in 2012, while employing fewer than 38,000 people. 840,000 people versus 38,000 people, and that is adjusted for inflation. How then can we help build a more hopeful future with peace, liberty, and justice for all, not merely for some? Along those lines, last week, in reflecting on the life and work of James Baldwin, we talked about the importance of our UU's second principle, the words and deeds of prophetic people who challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Among our list of contemporary prophets, I would include the writer, the environmental activist, and cultural critic, Wendell Berry. One of the central questions he asks that has really struck with me since I first read this book many years ago, he asks, what are people for? Our UU first principle, echoing the UN Declaration of Human Rights, upholds the inherent worth and dignity of every person, period, without qualification, without needing to do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around for 8 hours with a shovel to have inherent worth and dignity. This value has the potential to help us shape a very different sort of society than the one in which humans are valued only for the profit margins that their labor can generate for corporations. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, equally important to Martin Ford's book, Rise of the Robots, is a bestseller that the New York Times named as one of the top 100 books of 2017. It's titled World Without Mind. It's kind of a pun on artificial intelligence. World Without Mind, the Existential Threat of Big Tech. It's by a guy named Franklin Foer, and he has a particular interest in this topic. He was hired to be editor of the New Republic in 2012 when that media organization was bought by Chris Hughes. Some of you will know that name. He was roommates at Harvard with Mark Zuckerberg, the co-founder of Facebook. This purchase by one of these new tech people of kind of old media was hailed as a prime example of how these new tech companies can help the humanity. We can take these tech millions and billions and help. But a little more than 2 years later, Hughes fired Foer when the profit margins were just too slow to rise. Recent headlines have often been siren calls that things can go really badly in our new world of 21st century tech. Witness the ways that Russian hackers helped manipulate the American public in order to elect a reality television star as president of the United States. Or consider just the first lines of an article from the New York Times this past week. Cambridge Analytica, the political data firm with ties to President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, suspended its chief executive on Tuesday amid the furor over the access it gained to the private information of more than 50 million Facebook users. So if any of you have ever run a Facebook ad, they can be incredibly micro-targeted, right? So you can be incredibly specific in how and who sees that ad. Well, you can use that same data to be incredibly micro-targeted with your political dollars, right? It's one of the reasons you saw Mark Zuckerberg do a 50-state tour, kind of weighing his, do I want to run for president and or at least trying to be more of the people. It didn't work very well, but anyway. Reflecting on the growing power and influence of the big four tech companies, sometimes abbreviated GAFA, so Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Foer writes, we have deluded ourselves into caring more deeply about convenience and efficiency than about things that last. And don't get me wrong, these new tech, they're really neat gadgets. They do incredibly powerful things. But he's inviting us to say, what have we given up for all of this convenience and efficiency? He says, compared to the sustained nourishment of the contemplative life and a deep commitment to text, many of the promiscuous pleasures of the web are very vanishing. The contemplative life, though, remains freely available to us through our choices. What we read, what we buy, how we commit to leisure and self-improvement, the passing over of empty temptation, our preservation of quiet spaces, and intentional striving to become masters of our mastery instead of being mastered. There's a book by the tech critic Douglas Rushkoff that says, program or be programmed, right? So which side are you on? But the technology corporations are actively trying to exploit our human weaknesses to keep us in thrall, using their products, giving them increasing amounts of data about ourselves, augmenting their quarterly profits as they in turn use our intention and data to lure advertising dollars. So some of you have heard me say before, what we need is a triple bottom line that accounts for people, planet, and profit. That profit's still there, profit motive is real, but we have to balance profit motive alone with the value of human beings and sustaining the ecosystems of this fragile planet. And the incentives are just too great to expect, the short-term profits are too great to expect corporations to do the right thing on their own. To be even more direct, as best I can tell, there is a 3-word answer that is the best way of responding to the rise of the robots. And that is a universal basic income. Some of you will recall I said a lot more about what that would mean in my Labor Day sermon this past year, titled Beyond $15, the sturdy floor of a universal basic income, making sure everyone has a sturdy floor from which to operate on. I was fascinated to read this line near the end of Ford's book, Rise of the Robots. He writes, "Some form of guaranteed income is probably the best overall solution to the rise of automation technology." And it's like, and how do we pay for that? Well, you tax the rich. That's where the money is. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. That it's this. We have a wealth gap in our country, and we've got. That's not to say everyone needs to be equal, but does everyone have at least a basic minimum that allows a dignified human life? For now, regarding the choices before us as a species, I'll leave you with these words from Wendell Berry's book, What Are People For? He writes, "I knew a man who in the age of chainsaws went right on cutting his wood with a handsaw and an axe. He was a healthier and a saner man than I am. I shall let his memory trouble my thoughts." In that spirit, let's rise in spirit and sing together hymn 121.